Welcome to the Cold Brew Coffee TV show. It's a new series, and this is episode 1. I'm Denet, the host and producer. I thought I'd take a little time to talk about where we're going and also about coffee. The goal is for people to really appreciate coffee more and to learn, both for people that just want to sit down and learn a little bit more about coffee, but also for coffee professionals that are looking to gain the next edge and see where the industry is going. So thanks for watching episode 1. We'll be focusing primarily on cold brew. I thought we'd start by talking about what is cold brew. Cold brew is a brewing process. So we will be getting into depth about what makes cold brew different than regular iced coffee or regular coffee, and how that process and the equipment you use is different. But I also want to talk a little bit about regular coffee, and I thought we would start with the coffee farm. So we'll be going from the coffee farm all the way through how you dispense using nitrogen. Now, I was fortunate to grow up on a coffee farm on the big island of Hawaii in the Kona region. My dad started a farm when I was in high school, actually before I was in high school, and when I grew up there. So we had a 6-acre plot in Honau now in South Kona. And my dad was really ahead of his day in the trees that he grew and the way that he could just go and bring these plants to produce better products or better beans. Now, as a side note of interest, some people may wonder why coffee has caffeine in it. The caffeine in coffee is actually something it's a chemical the plant puts in naturally, and it's believed to protect it from a pest and other things that would otherwise eat the coffee berry. There have been a couple of pests that have gotten a resistance to caffeine, and that's a real challenge for the industry. But as a whole, the caffeine is there to protect the plant seed. Coffee itself, and we'll talk about the fruit a little bit. Coffee is actually a fruit. We normally take and drink the seed, but you can dry the fruit, and you can actually, it's called cascara in the industry, you can make a drink from it. The drink doesn't taste anything like coffee, but it is high in antioxidants. It's considered a superfruit. So what you'll be more familiar with would be some nice, these are medium roasted Kona coffee beans. And the Kona coffee beans tend to be some of the larger ones. These are gorgeous, but I have some dark roasted ones here that are even larger. So if you look at the size of these coffee beans, you always want to look at what you're drinking and watch the beans. These are really nice ones. Okay, so we have a couple of photos I wanted to go through of the coffee trees and some of my dad's farm, and then we'll get more into depth on cold brew after that. So if we could bring up the first of the slides, there's the Hawaiian petroglyph, and this show, it's kind of a cool picture of the coffee beans there being lifted up. Coffee is something that gives you energy. Now you can see the coffee blossoms there. They're a white blossom, and you get several blossomings through each season after a good rain. In Kona, it's nicknamed the Kona snow. So you can see this tree has a pretty good set of blossoms going, and this is absolutely gorgeous. And that's going to lead to hopefully a really nice crop of coffee beans later in the season. So there, the actual fruit turns out to be red when they're ready to pick. So you can see the red beans would be ripe, and you want to pick the red beans. So this was a tank that I helped my dad build this. It was part of a coffee mill, and we use this for milling the beans. So this is part of the actual process. And then this is the drying shed. We sun-dried the beans, and you can see my dad spent quite a few hours on the process, and he'd get out there and rake the beans and push them. So there's my dad actually pushing the beans, and you don't want them to stick together. You want to make sure they're getting uniformly dry. So he was there drying them. This is some artwork my grandmother did for the label we used to have on the coffee beans. So there's a picture of my grandma, who I greatly miss, and she is an inspiration, and just nice to have her artwork out there. And here is some of my dad's favorite prime trees, and you can see the dark green leaves and the red berries are a very nice, beautiful contrast. And I want to point out it's really important to support small agriculture in America. Having these small family farms is just such a nice thing to be involved with, and it really brings a lot of benefits to society. Okay, well, now that we've seen some coffee trees and some berries and some beans, let's talk a little bit. And on future episodes, I want to bring on guests and have them go cover topics that people want to hear and learn more about. So if you want to learn more about a topic and have suggestions for guests, let me know. But I wanted to kind of introduce the show, talk about coffee, the history a little bit, the beans, and then talk about the brewing process, and then we'll get into cold brew and dispensing technologies. Okay, a lot of people are familiar with the pour overs and the way that you would put your coffee in here and pour and make a beverage. With a hot beverage or a hot coffee, you're using heat to help speed up the extraction. With an espresso maker, you're using pressure in addition to heat to speed up the time that you extract from your coffee. With cold brew, and you can make cold brew in a French press. With cold brew, you're using time as opposed to temperature for your extraction. So my definition of cold brew is a coffee that is utilized time in lower temperatures for the extraction, as opposed to heat as a primary mover to get the extraction. I was at a coffee fest competing in the cold brew competition just recently. And there's actually, I don't believe there's an official definition of cold brew by the Coffee Society yet, but it's very noteworthy to realize that the industry is now seeing cold brew as something that's not just a trend, but it's a new classification, like espresso is a type of a coffee beverage. Cold brew is the new beverage. Now you can actually make cold brew. There's two basic methods to make it. One of the methods for making cold brew is a process we call the immersion process, and that you can simply do it in a French press by taking your coffee, giving it a coarse grind, putting it in the French press for a period. Usually they're doing 16 to 24 hours. Some people go outside that, but that's the most common time. And then you let your coffee sit in your French press, and then you filter it down and you pour it and drink it. Some people do an extra filter and put it through a pour over filter as a secondary filtration. But the key is you want to be able to brew your coffee using time. A lot of people are experimenting with all the different ends, from doing hot blooms where you start off with a little warm water and then you go to moisten the grinds, and then you put your cold water on. Others are just using cold water for the whole extraction part. There is a second way you can do an extraction for a cold brew, which is not doing immersion, but it's doing a drip. So you might have noticed there's some beautiful glass towers, and they have it where they slowly drip the water through. You can actually use a device such as an AeroPress. If you want to take a water bottle, you can put it upside down and poke a hole in it, put your coffee grinds in here and slowly drip them through, and you get something called a slow drip cold brew. It's sometimes referred to as the Kyoto cold brew. I guess the Dutch went to Kyoto, Japan, and had experimented with cold brew coffee quite some time ago. So it's been around for centuries. Okay, so you have got the two major styles of cold brew again. The immersion style, where you're soaking the beans for an extended period of time, usually in the 12 to 24-hour period. A lot go 16 to 18 hours, some like it 24. I've seen some experiment all the way out to 48 hours, but the vast majority are doing 12 to 24 hours, and they're soaking them. A lot of the bigger chains out there will do batches. Some are brewed in buckets. Others are looking to the beer industry to learn from beer brewing technologies on how to get bigger batches going. And again, the second way is doing a slow drip process. And we'll get more into depth on that and hopefully get some guests on future episodes that can really talk about how to make a good Kyoto style slow drip coffee. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about where the industries are. There's a couple of things. So first off, the brewing technique. You want to source the best beans you can find. I ran a bunch of tests. One of the key things to making a nice cold brew really comes down to what your bean selection is. What kind of roast profiles are you using? How fresh are your beans? All the variables count, but of all the ones I tested, the actual beans that you're using, that is still a huge contributing factor to the end product that you get. So you want to think of all the variables, and again, going back to the farm, when were the beans picked, how are they processed, all these things are going to give you a better cup of coffee. Throughout the coffee industry, a lot of it is what we call commodity coffee, but specialty coffee is where we're really looking to bring up the quality and create nicer products. So we want to find the better ways to present those and to lead to finer products at the end that we can enjoy. So I'm going to switch from the two major brewing styles, again, the immersion style and the slow drip style on the brewing of cold brew. Again, cold brew is using the a longer extraction period at lower temperatures. The reason we're doing cold brew, you get a unique flavor profile. You get, some are saying 67 or 70% less acidic coffee. So you're getting a far less acidic cold brew. And you also find that you don't need to use as much sugar or cream in it. So you're getting a drink that can be healthier and clean and something that's just quite enjoyable to drink. Now, I've been hinting that there's a couple phases of cold brew. We covered the two major brewing styles. I wanted to talk about the dispensing technologies and styles. Cold brew can be dispensed just like beer. So we're going to look at dispensing it like beer. You can put it in a growler. You can simply make it in your refrigerator in a French press, put it in a growler. It will last about a week if you keep it refrigerated. You can pour it out and drink it. So that's the other interesting thing, is that cold brew tends to be much more stable because it's made at a lower temperature and you're not having the difference in flavor. If you take a sip of your warm coffee, the first sip to the last sip, you're going to notice a flavor or a difference as the temperature changes. But in cold brew, you're drinking it at a constant temperature, so that won't occur. Okay, so some of the technologies we've been learning from the beer industry, there's kegs. So this right here is a 1.5 gallon keg system, and it's common with the home brewers. You've got a bigger lid up here, you've got a vent. If you pull this, you'll get a nice pressure release and a pop. Do that again. So you keep these under pressure, and you can control what gas, you control what gas you're putting in here, so you're not exposed to the oxygen of the air. There are common gases used for beer are CO2, or carbon dioxide, but in coffee, carbon dioxide will carbonate your coffee, and it doesn't really leave a nice flavor. There's a beer gas, which is a mix of carbon dioxide and nitrogen, but that will eventually get into your coffee. It gives a beautiful cascading effect, but it also gives you a bit of a sour taste as it slightly carbonates your coffee, so you don't really want to be dispensing from beer gas. There's some people that are using a nitrogen and they're dispensing with a stout, a regular faucet like this, which will give you, it'll give you a nice, you can fill a cup up, it will dispense nice, but you're not going to get a real deep nitrogen infusion when you use a spout like this. If you really want to have a good nitrogen infusion, you need a faucet that's designed to do it, a stout faucet, which is where we really go to introduce how a stout beer being dispensed. So if you want to look back here, we'll go through the equipment and then we'll serve a glass and we'll see. But I have a jockey box here which has some coils in it to cool the beverage down. I've got a stainless steel 2.5 gallon half keg here. As contrast, this is a full keg, so this would be a 5 gallon keg that a lot of home brewers would be familiar with. Again, you've got the same lid on top as the smaller kegs, but you would have to use a commercial or at least a larger refrigerator to store these. And I have my nitrogen tank here. So my nitrogen tank has compressed nitrogen in it. And then I have my regulator here where I can control the amount of pressure coming out of the nitrogen tank. That nitrogen then goes inside my keg, and from the keg it goes into the beverage, is pushed through, and then I dispense it through the stout faucet. Unlike carbon dioxide, nitrogen does not like to dissolve easily into a liquid. So I've been experimenting around on this. You'll notice I actually have my nitrogen going on the center because I'm using a carbonation stone that I have inside the keg that dispenses or disperses down to 0.5 microns. So the gas actually is getting dispersed in the bottom of my tank with a 0.5 micron carbonation stone. And you don't need that. If you keep the pressure up and keep it under time, under pressure with nitrogen, especially if you shake the tank, or you don't really need to have the carbonation stone. I've been running some experiments, but it certainly can speed up the process of getting the nitrogen infusion. So you guys ready to see the nitrogen infusion and to take a taste? You'll notice a couple things. Before, I was drinking from a bigger glass here, and this is not nitrogen coffee, it's still. But when you have nitrogen coffee, you want to present it in a smaller glass because you don't want to have ice, you don't want to have a lid, you want to get the crema. So the industry has been evaluating what kind of glassware do you want to serve your nitrogen coffee. And again, you wouldn't drink a stout beer through a straw, and you wouldn't put a lid on your stout beer. So you want to serve your coffee in a smaller glass because you're not having ice, just like you don't drink ice with your beer or stout dark beer. So we're really leaning to the craft beer industry to learn. So if you see the, you can see the crema on the top, and I'll set this down so we can watch just how long the nitrogen infusion lasts. The longer the nitrogen infusion lasts, the better. So if you can zoom up and kind of see the bubbles, the bottom it's slowly coming out of, but on the top we're sitting up there as the nitrogen just, it's been dissolved into the liquid. Although I said it doesn't like to dissolve, I was able to infuse it pretty well there. And you notice how you have the cream texture, or the foam on the top of the liquid, on top of the coffee as the nitrogen rises up, which really not only looks nice, but it tastes good. So again, you don't need to be putting cream on this. You don't need ice on it. You just want to have a nice nitrogen pour. You want the nitrogen to be infused in the liquid. And it's taken a lot of experimenting and trying for me to get it to pour this well. And as you can see, we're still in there. The nitrogen bubbles are far smaller than the bubbles you get from carbon dioxide. So if they're real micro bubbles, and the technology is just fascinating how you can play with a gas and infuse that nitrogen in the coffee beverage. Also, once you're in a keg, the life you get is substantially longer than the life you would get with a regular coffee or even an iced coffee. I've been looking at the industry and the experiments, and basically we think once you're in a keg, even at ambient room temperatures, you should be able to get about a month shelf life out of your product as long as your process is solid. And if you're refrigerated, 90 days seem to be quite achievable. So if you look back at the beverage, you'll notice we're just getting the finer bits of the bubbles are finally dissolving upward towards the top of the beverage, getting that creamy texture on top. I've got to take a sip of this as we're talking. Actually, the cream infusion is just delicious. It's really nice. The texture and the taste, it's super smooth, and it's much more enjoyable than having the still coffee, at least to me. I think it's a really exciting time to be in the cold coffee industry because these new drinks we're coming out with and the technology that we're learning from the craft brewers and looking at the micro lots, getting finer coffee, just ironing out the whole processes and then finding a new way to dispense it and to store your coffee. And of course, drinking it is still very enjoyable. So I noticed there's no bitterness on here. This was actually a lighter roast coffee that I was experimenting with, so I do have a lot of lighter flavors and notes in here. It's really enjoyable. And okay, so I will be offering some coffee to the crew. We have an all-volunteer crew that helps us here in the media center. So at the end, I would like the volunteer crew to come up and sample some of this coffee. And thank you so much for the help from our wonderful crew. This is a public access studio, second to none, and a really great thing. It's wonderful to have the access here and to be able to do these shows. So that's my plug for the staff, for the crew here and the wonderful set of volunteers that help make this show possible. Okay, so I see coffee. We're forming where you had the first wave of coffee. It was instantized. You had Folgers and these big name brands that came out, and it was all about how can you get more people to access coffee. Quality went out the door, and it became a commodity product. Coffee is one of the largest traded commodities in the world, and as this occurred, it was all about getting more coffee to more people. And again, then as the industry matured, we had our second wave where a couple big chains came out and really popularized coffee. They took it to the next level. But again, the quality improved, and they started to look at the farmers and get the farmers more involved. But it wasn't until the third wave that some of these smaller roasters and smaller companies came and started to really refine how to get a better cup, a perfect cup of coffee. They started looking at the industry and the farmers and what it takes to have all these variables coming together to give a better cup of coffee. Now, some say we're still in the third wave, but I'm going to argue that actually cold brew coffee is the fourth wave, and that having coffee on tap is where we're headed, and that we're learning from the microbreweries, and that it's going to be in the future you'll have a cold brewery where you'll have different varieties from different farms. You'll be able to find a Kenya AAA, a Kenya, a light roast. Then you'll have a couple of different Konas, a Blue Mountain. You'll have different coffees from different parts of the world, Central America, and you get to choose which coffee you want, as we have become accustomed to choosing which kind of wines we want and which area we want our wines from. We're headed that same direction with coffee, and I could see having it'd be really cool to have a cold room or a cold draft, just like a line of taps. We had a whole bunch of handles with different coffees on draft, on tap, and you could sample different ones, do a flight of different coffees, really sit there and enjoy coffee as a whole kind of new beverage and a new drink. So what I'd like to do with this show is I would like to open it up for a guest to come out and talk about different trends and things that they've learned, have us share knowledge with other people in the coffee industry. How can we refine and brew better cold brew? How can we get better beans? What's the roasting process to get the optimal roast for cold brew? What are the better delivery technologies for delivering cold brew on draft and on tap? How can we store cold brew better? How can we bottle it? Bottling is something really fun. I've been experimenting around with using a counter pressure bottle filler where I purge the oxygen out of the bottle before I fill it. And then I fill it from the bottom up using beer technology. So you get rid of the oxygen, fill it under pressure, with nitrogen infusion, and then cap it at the top. So I want to share with other people in the industry, what can we do to share knowledge, to get better coffee, to get better shelf life, more stable products, and what are the best practices out there. From the roots of growing up on a coffee farm where my dad won the Kona cupping contest, I always want to emphasize the importance of the farm, treating the farmers right, making sure that we have systems in place where the farmers are properly compensated and where they're paid better, and where we really get the farmers emphasized on getting higher quality products and go away from just how much can you produce and instead look at how good of coffee can you produce. What are the finer flavors, the finer emphasis you can do to really heighten that bean and bring finer coffee to the consumers. The one key takeaway too is looking at all the variables from all the inputs the farmer has, the fertilizer, the water, the temperatures, all the way, and what nature has, all the way down to the roast profiles, to our brewing technology, to our serving technology. It's nothing but variables that we all put together to come up with a very fine cup of coffee. I look forward to sharing with you more and getting people to share with me on future episodes. You've been watching the Cold Brew Coffee TV show, and I look forward to seeing you on future episodes. Thank you. I'm Denet, the host and producer. And now I'd like to invite all the crew to grab some cups, come on up here and sample some coffee for yourself. Thank you to the wonderful crew.